That's probably not the case in a lot of church history, at least.
We're just kind of going over any the sort of habit audit sheet, if you got into any of that thoughts.
Jill, I'm gonna bring this a little closer to you,
Okay.
because I'm a little loud with this kid. So it's just gonna be a recording of Turner.
Just keys.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's good. And it is interesting how sort of like school, work, and sort of like the commercial holiday calendar has co-opted the church calendar. In a lot of, unless you're still sort of like high church.
As well as that work calendar, the annual tax
Yep.
calendar.
Yep.
Like the weather, I've noticed, is a really big deal for me. And like, I can't even connect that spiritually, because like winter is a very hard time. And I really like struggle with the darkness, and then spring, like I honestly, every time, especially in the Pacific Northwest and in Vancouver, where spring is just so beautiful, like the flowers, like it's spiritual to me. I'm just
Yeah.
like, this is what hope is. Like this is just so beautiful. And then summer is just like glory time. I'm just like, yes. Like I wake up and it's sunny, and I feel thankful for it every day, because in the winter I just feel like I'm just like doing a lot of work to be like, okay, make sure you're taking your vitamin D, make sure you're getting outside no matter what, like make sure your mental health is okay. Like it's such work to get through winter. So, and I didn't grow up experiencing weather like this. So I don't know, it's right?
Yeah.
Similar weather-wise in some ways, but like I don't get depressed in the winter, or my feet are cold from November to March. Because I have zero circulation,
Yeah.
so I just kind of work outside and so I am miserable, but not depressed. But when it gets warm, the joy is
Yeah.
really, it's just like, thank you, God, for sunshine.
You're gonna be there, like your feet warm.
In the wintertime, I wear
Just
down
tried
boots
everything.
under like 400 gram boots with socks and if they like sweat and get cold, and it's certain business. You gotta find this fine point too. It's like it's just tolerable. But I have all these other rituals that are really helpful in my phone and calendar. Like, there's just a series of verses that come up daily. There's a thing that I get reminded of once a month, first Saturday of the month. And just reminders, like one is essay form, to be rather than appear. A series of verses, and then I'll read through the Bible in a year, and then I'll take a month to 6 months off and read some topical related, and I'll start the Bible every year. Keep track of the dates that I finished certain books and stuff. And most of that has just been framework and understanding with occasional insights. Think about this thing today. But I have a total freedom of schedule. And I don't need sleep very much, so even when I was working, I could get up early. That's been the most meaningful to me, just reminders, things to process and keep it forefront. But then daily reading, try to do listening prayer, but also meeting with people is really important to me. So meeting with a couple guys, it's been going on a couple of years. Friday morning meeting with guys, and that's been in church, the church by life group, and But I'm other end of the freedom scale.
Get there someday. Anything else?
Well, your third question, made me think of Halloween.
Yes.
How we tried to change that. But it's funny because certain children didn't appreciate it.
You won't mention any names.
The black
What's in names you have 4 to choose from?
Well, not completely, but yeah, I don't know that we really did well to practice seeing God there. Like, you know, I feel like we tried to flip it over, but it was hard to make it mean something.
Yeah.
Thing that everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and yeah, that's an interesting aspect of trying to form your own habits to shape your kids' habits, and which things grab them and which things don't. Yeah, that's an interesting.
I mean, it's weird to process your habit life and then think, if my kids were teenagers right now and they were just in all of these habits with me, would I be happy about that? Or would I be like, oh, we should change things? Because and the number one thing we both, because Mick and I did it together yesterday and tried to think through it, just reaching our kids as teenagers. And the first one is I would be embarrassed by how much they see us look at our phones.
Yeah.
And we try to be intentional about that now where we're like present with them.
Yeah.
But we also have the benefit of them being little, so we can like, I don't know, they're not catching on in a lot of ways to how we like probably sneak up time on our phones or something.
Yeah.
Well, if they're teenagers, they would totally know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's embarrassing. I just want to like not be like that. by the
Yeah.
time they're teenagers. Then the other thing is, I was actually surprised by how much the center of gravity for that conversation was around the screens.
Mhm.
It was around the phones.
Yeah.
I like, both Mick and I feel like I'm not actually scared at all of them encountering or engaging with anything in the culture. I like want them to have a confidence in Jesus, hopefully.
Yeah.
That they can like be brave and lights in a dark culture. But I am anxious about the pace at which they go into the culture. And I feel like the phone is this weird, like, it just speeds up how much they're ingesting
Mhm.
without there being any conversation or thoughtfulness or processing.
Yep.
It's like I would like for them to encounter or know about the darkest things out there that they'll face. I just want it to like come at a pace that matches their maturity level. And I just feel like, I don't know. Yeah, my hope is that they grow up in a time that is reacting in a healthy way against the like
Mhm.
screen time of like maybe middle schoolers today.
Mhm.
My hope is that when Liv's in middle school, people have been like, wow, that was crazy. We let our middle schoolers have phones. What was wrong with that?
Yeah.
And it won't be so weird if she doesn't have one.
Or there would be more and more options of like a thing that looks like a phone, but all it does is text message and call you.
Yeah, just get you back to mom.
Yeah.
Totally.
And yeah, I found myself similarly being mostly concerned with sort of like the cultural infrastructure more than the like stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
That sort of fluctuates.
I was really concerned about the culture of messages that kids were getting. Again, I do think all the things I tried. My parents now, I don't know if they, like, I wanted them to really think about money and interest and not just spending money. And I tried to set up things and it made them too complex, so they didn't really like them. And Halloween for us was Reformation celebration, so I wanted it to be about the church and like, you want candy, you give candy. You want to, try to make it a fun night. But then they all like, you got totally screwed.
Well, part of the problem, then we have friends, yeah. We got like a bag of candy and then you go to your friend's house and they got pillowcases. And they're just like, well, I can see what's happening here.
And then I get teased a lot of trying to rewatch the Emperor's New Groove, and one problem was our kids were spread out. So it was just totally, and instead of like talking about it after the movie, I kept stopping the movie to try to like get salient like what was going on there. And, come on, Dad. And then Jehovah's Witness came to the door, so I ended up talking to them for about an hour, and they're like waiting for this movie to go on. And so I'm never at the end of that.
No, it's basically the worst movie watching experience you can imagine. Oh my gosh, that's the
But I always wanted them to think and process it. I used to like and watch the Saturday morning cartoons with. I'm trying to get them to say that back to. Do you expect us to believe that to commercials? And commercials.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You guys can pray for Joel's.
I think I'm okay. Cool, yeah. We'll probably revisit some of these things as we go too. So I don't think I need to recap very deeply. We went through kind of like Genesis 1 and 2, how that pulled us into, you see God putting Adam and Eve in a specific place. They're made to worship, they're made to image God, they're made to care for things. The worship and culture being formative, and they can be mutually reinforcing, or they can be sort of reflective and prophetic, and apocalyptic or revealing, to use like a biblical word. And just that we are worshiping beings we can't not worship, but we can orient our worship. And then we talked a bit about the scandal of particularity and how God has always communicated himself to us by contextualizing himself to our cultural and imaginative limitations, whether those are linguistic or narrative devices, speaking through the prophets, the priesthood, the pictures that the tabernacle and the temple formed in people. We are constrained somewhat in our conceptions of God by our own imaginative capacity. So the ways that our imaginations are exercised really matter in how we conceive of God and what we think about who we're supposed to be. Okay, so want to start talking a bit about ways that these narratives are formed in our culture. So this quote is from an artist who used to live in Vancouver and moved to Texas this past year, but his name's Scott Erickson, super interesting guy. But he is talking about sort of the God-shaped hole story and says, you may have heard this narrative, hey, you've got this hole in your life. You keep trying to fill it with the rectangle of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and it's not working. You keep trying to fill it with the triangle of success or travel or Instagram likes, whatever. It's not working out. What you need is you need the circle of God, and it will fill the circle hole and you'll be complete. The only problem is when you make the divine a product. If that product ever stops working, you leave it. This toothpaste didn't clean my teeth. This weed killer didn't kill my weeds. This God let my dreams die, and you walk away. The other problem with this argument is it presupposes the giver of your existence hasn't already been involved in your life the whole time. I heard him say this the first time probably 3 years ago, and it was just a really like I'm assuming most of us have heard the like God-shaped hole story picture of like, but he just sort of upends like what is problematic about that as a picture. And part of the like, we've been doing church in this consumeristic, sort of corporatist system for long enough that like, this is a metaphor that kind of made sense to a lot of people. But it has all these embedded, real deep theological issues with it that we may or may not have been conscious of, hearing it or communicating about it. So the ways we, think about like, is God a product that fills this hole in my life? And what are the implications of that? So I'm kind of curious, just surveying the room, like, did anyone register the like industrial consumer implications or metaphor of this? And like, how did that, was that a problem for anybody before this morning?
I didn't register it as consumerism upon hearing it. Obviously, I heard this in like every youth conference.
Yeah, ever in your whole life.
But what's interesting is I didn't put like consumer categories on it. I didn't think about this in those terms. Nick and I have this conversation all the time about this is just your experience. If you buy into that, you have this experience.
Yeah.
Like, well, what the heck?
Yep.
Frankly, I get more satisfaction out of those things that everyone's saying I'm not supposed to get satisfaction out of, and God leaves me high and dry.
Mhm.
And there's a real issue if there's not a place in the church to talk about. Oh my gosh, sorry, I'm also a parent.
It's fine, it's okay.
It's fine, we got it.
You got a room full of parents.
Yeah, this is a felt experience.
Yeah.
Like, even though I'm not putting this language to it all the time, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about how it's really unhelpful if you make God this thing you purchase.
Yeah.
Even though that's what everyone's saying you're not supposed to do, God's not a vending machine.
Yeah.
But then you have that narrative, it's like he kind of is supposed to be.
And your life is supposed to get better after you
Right.
accept God.
Well, and I find it troublesome when I'm trying to present God to someone else.
Yep.
Because then I have to kind of like backpedal and say, well, but it won't be like this or this, maybe, but you gotta give him some time. Give him some grace, because he's God.
Yeah. Yeah, you sort of realize all of our stories are like really consumer product oriented and are promising things that they can't necessarily deliver. Just by implication, even if it's not explicit.
I still kind of like it though, with a twist as far as like, I mean, it does sound kind of pedantic to say you've got this God-shaped hole and it's just sort of the thing that fits it. But I do feel like, if we change the analogy, like a gear or a cog or something, the whole thing works better and more fluidly, it's more powerful. If things are operating as they're meant to operate. And kind of, I also like where it fits with this is kind of the co-creator. You have the opportunity to let God make everything in your life better than it might have been. And so I think there's real truth in the negative of Baba Boom, Baba Bing, God will make everything better. And it doesn't always go that way. But the discussion of things really, how things work without God in a broken state, as opposed to the power and fluidity of the engine with all the gears matching right, things like that. I think there still is power in that analogy, but not making God a product, making God be who he is and getting to participate in what he's doing and not making everything.
I mean, the Bible, I'm thinking about like Proverbs and even Ecclesiastes. This is sort of like,
the book of
there's like this eternity shaped hole.
Yeah.
You're like made for eternity, or like do good and God does good to you. It's a biblical idea. It's biblical wisdom that like if you fill your life with garbage, it's bad. If you fill your life with God, it's good. That's the best way to live. The problem with this versus the Bible is the Bible understands that as wisdom. that's to be juggled in context with Job
Yep, yep, yep.
and everything else,
And
which
the
has
cross,
what?
and the cross.
And the cross, right, it has space to navigate the complexity
Mhm.
and to say like, hey, this isn't a guarantee, it's wisdom. And like, when you hear this at a youth conference, you don't hear this as wisdom that needs to be balanced alongside of suffering and the cross and everything else. It's like, you hear this as like a product
Yep.
that you should invest in right now.
Yep.
And I don't know, the Bible just doesn't think in those terms. It has giant works of poetry to help you navigate that.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, the thing I think this prods at really well is like what metaphors we choose. And when we and also how those metaphors operate. Like when the metaphor is so culturally latent that we aren't even necessarily conscious which metaphor is being employed, like then you get into real, like you're sharing this metaphor that you're not even total, like it's the water you're swimming in. So to like communicate it to other people and be able to fully communicate the wisdom and the breadth of like what it actually is trying to get across. Because there is a level of like because we were created for God, but the you know, part of the issue with this is it sort of inverts the like you just need to bring God into your autonomous life and like things will be better.
Yeah, can I pick up on that?
Yeah, go for it.
So that's, I never saw it as consumeristic. It's odd because usually my mind is super skeptical of stuff like this in that way. And like I said earlier, I've always heard it as a whole,
Mhm.
God-shaped whole.
Mhm.
A lot of people probably heard it just yesterday
Mhm.
in AA, which by the way is one of my practices. Audits is that community. But the thing here that always bugged me when I was little, that always kind of stood out to me was like what are you selling? You said you need to invest in this.
Yep.
You know, I never thought about that. That's really good, but I get real. It's why I'm really good at selling is because I'm really sensitive to the anal sales.
Yeah.
And like what that's like.
Yeah.
And anytime I've been in those positions, I dominate, and I mean broken all records because I treat the humanity.
Yep.
And I don't push products,
Mhm.
right? So I create a pull for them because they want it,
Mhm.
which is not appropriate here necessarily, but there's a vast difference.
Yep.
Between. And so what this is doing is that I've always felt, even as a kid, if I've heard this, or even now that it's so small, God-shaped hole,
Mhm.
always felt like you know the joke, the Monty Python thing of like, oh God, you are so big, you're so unbelievably huge. You know, like they're just overdoing this sort of like dignitarian approach to
Yeah.
prayer, which I think goes missing a lot in our really informal culture.
Yep.
And so we forget the unimaginably hugeness
Yep.
of him.
Yep.
And that this is a me-centered approach to the gospel, which I personally think of what 90% of Western church is. I'm 90%, pick a number, 82, 71,
87% of statistics.
99. You know, we're in the 1% here, right? But it's a very me-centered psychology focused thing.
Yep. Telling
Telling somebody you're trying to fill all of this emptiness. Instead, it's not a hole inside of you. It's not a circle that you're trying to cram a triangle into. It's brokenness, and God came. The other day I was sitting there, people were like debating like higher power, and I don't know I can't. And one of the guys, Pastor Duo, just says, you know, my God, Jesus came because I'm broken and I need him.
Mhm.
I need a doctor. I'm sick.
Mhm.
And it just like cleared the decks for everybody,
Mhm.
right? So that brings the humanity back in. And that's the thing about like, you're unhappy because
Yep.
really grates on me.
Yep.
Happiness isn't a goal.
it's a byproduct of the journey you're on sometimes. Because it comes and goes. And so that's the like he hasn't been there the whole time. It makes him so little. Or like, that's the thing that's frustrating about it, because it doesn't leave any room for that broad, all the different things, and it really doesn't meet you where you are, which is ironic considering how self-centered the approach this is.
Wouldn't like, oh, I'm broken and I need to be whole, isn't there a bit of this is about me again, in a way, like, as opposed to like God is holy and, yeah, like beyond your imagination, beyond like just, yeah, your whole or your brokenness. I specifically asked the brokenness because I have friends that don't believe and they don't feel broken. They're like, I don't feel broken, so I don't feel like I need a healer or I don't know.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
I mean, there's always like, language is limited because there is a deep individual aspect to the gospel.
Yeah.
It's like Jesus had eyes on individuals and cared for their stories, offered them like these crazy personalized packages of eternal life. I'm thinking of like the woman at the well who he offers living water. It's like, that is such a catered, individualized message for her alone that goes for the world. It's like he's speaking to her brokenness.
Yep.
So it's like you could probably throw the baby out with the bathwater if you say like, I don't know, there's nothing personal in it, you know. It's like it's just that you have, I think, and maybe Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like, to your point, becoming aware though that like the waters we're swimming in as a culture is so individualized and so consumeristic.
Yep.
That you start to develop a habit from a false sense of God, of imagining it in a certain way that like is so unchecked because that's our culture. We're so individual. Whereas like the woman at the well lives in a culture where she's just like a number in a sea of like Samaritans that are already rejected, and you know, and so
Yeah, I mean, even like she is like a pool of shame in a
Right.
community that sees her a specific way.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I know plenty of people that similar experiences. Like we we went to this. Miranda and I met in college, and she wasn't a Christian when we met, and we would sort of like hop around to all these different sort of like Christian ministries and different churches and things like that. We went to this like Brown Reformed University Fellowship one week, and the whole conversation of the night was about reaching the lost. And this is like pre Miranda being a Christian, and so we're like break up into it's like, you know, 500 kids, and we like break up into small groups, and so we're in the circle of like 10 or 12 like college students, and it's all these like, you know, just your normal church kids talking about how bad they feel for the lost people. And Miranda, and I'm just like, this is gonna be really interesting. Like, I don't know what's, you know, like, and she's kind of like, you know, like I'm not depressed or like similar, just like I don't feel really bad about myself, or like, you know, that my life is in shambles, or, and so yeah, like our message really has to like be more robust, because we and to the point about sales is really interesting. I think like even the like consumer selling mentality is shifting in ways that you know, like good salespeople at this point know that your job is not to sell stuff to people that don't need it. Your job is to find the people that need your stuff, and really like personalize and meet people where they are.
It's all therapeutic.
Yeah.
It's all,
Yep.
what you're doing is you're providing an environment of therapy that person wants.
Mhm.
I mean, really think about it.
Yeah.
Everything you buy is a moral decision about the values of who you are.
Yep.
And people do it, and here's our narcissism, and I hate that word because it's so overused. But if you don't like as a narcissist now. But like our self-centered nature, our flesh nature is so pervasive in our culture in a way that it never has been.
Yeah.
Or in a way that it is in cycles in all
Yeah.
developing
Yeah.
societies.
That's probably, yeah.
Okay. Right before our fall, this is where we find ourselves, I'll put it that way, is that we're looking for everything to satisfy, to like therapize us, whatever.
Yeah.
Somehow, we're all we do is pull everything in. And I love that she said that God is holy.
Mhm.
I'll never forget a professor when I worked at Oklahoma who was on the radio. So I'm listening to like, hey, how's the show? How's it doing? And so I booked them on there. And they're like, well, what about when like they were talking about same-sex marriage at the time and like sin and why does God allow whatever? And, you know, he's like, here's the thing. We don't understand holiness. We can't, just as much as we can slightly understand the concept of infinity,
Mhm.
we truly can't experience it.
Yeah.
Right now in a way that we're bound here.
Yeah.
Dimensionally.
Yeah.
We don't understand how God is outside of space and time. We don't understand how he just always was, like what does was and always even mean. And we don't understand holiness and why a holy God can't be around sin. Like that we don't understand holiness. When you said the word holy, I have to remind myself of that statement all the time. It's like, ooh, no, I don't understand holiness. And I don't know where I'm going with that. I felt it was really important what you said about that he's holy and that like, yeah, okay, the brokenness part, like that bugs me a little bit too, since I know I said it, there's the habit. The God, that was me saying my like God-shaped circle right there is like brokenness. Or like the word community or whatever. So like, even if we're living in community and we're not being so self-centered, so often we're living in community as a statement about ourselves.
Mhm.
That I'm somebody who lives in community with others, like community with you this morning. It's not that. So like one of the best men I ever knew, never wanted to entertain the idea of Jesus because like frankly, he didn't need it. And I honestly like really could look at this guy and just be like, you lived a long, really good, ethical, hardworking, but not too hard life. And everybody, I can't think of one person who ever has anything bad to say, but like, I'm like, I want you on our team. Right? Like, how can I like, and so I just stopped talking to him about Jesus over time. He's probably gonna pass away within the year. And that sort of thing of like, this man he doesn't have brokenness in such a way, but like, I don't know what on earth, he just doesn't see a need for Jesus, and quite frankly, I don't blame him. And it's such a weird thing, and that is heartbreaking for me, but getting back to the holiness, how not understandably big God is.
Mhm.
I don't know what his purpose for Steve is, what his intention at design is for Steve.
Mhm.
But I haven't thought about that guy in years, but there he is. It's like, yeah, in my mind, you don't need Jesus. I don't know, you don't have a circle hole inside of you, you know? When you're sad or you're mad at your wife, you go on a week-long trail ride on your back horses out in the backcountry, like, great, sounds wonderful for you, you know, and then she's fine with it, and you guys get, you know, whatever, back to life.
I mean, it's interesting too, like even in all of that, the like all of the ways that we're framing these things are necessarily incomplete stories about who God is. And, you know, like the idea that, I mean, you know, you talk about like, so at the end of this spoken word performance art show that Scott Erickson does, he like gets to this place where he's like camping in the desert someplace and or Idaho or Montana, and like he has this photograph of the sky, and it's like you know, we're like running around and there's ambient light, and ambient noise everywhere, and we're all on our phones all the time. And we get in our little like climate controlled cars and drive to work and then sit in our office and like do all these things that give us this illusion that we're in control of everything. And then you go someplace where you can still see the sky and you're like, oh, I'm really small. Like I'm really a small creature, like in this larger cosmos that exists all around me. And there's also this like, you know, in some ways the whole, we've lost the narrative importance of like, God made us and he wants to know us. Like fundamentally, that's like, it doesn't matter how broken we are, but like, just like, and is there, but back to kind of like the night sky thing too. It's like, you know, it's fine to like, we all exist in this world that sort of has like lifestyle benchmarks for how well everybody's doing. But if we are actually proclaiming the story of like the God that is actively putting breath in your lungs every moment that you exist and are alive, and that is what is sustaining your perpetual, your existence day to day, like that's a different story than like, oh, your life looks deficient in this way, so you need God. There's this like first cause, you know, aspect to the story of who God is in our lives that we've sort of like put down in a lot of ways because of our industrial capacity to pretend that we're in control of things.
I've been thinking, you've been talking about holiness and making God a product. I was thinking even Paul, and this is a total lousy paraphrase, but in 1 Corinthians 15, he's talking about resurrection. It's like, you know, if the dead don't rise, then you're most to be pitied or whatever. And it's almost like if you're just doing this stuff apart from understanding that I preach Christ and Christ crucified, and that being the central point, then I pity you. And it's all like if you're just filling a hole, you're most to be pitied. It's kind of like paraphrasing that.
Yeah. This has just seemed like a fitting photograph after that last quote. This is a photo by a photographer named Andreas Gursky. So like this is a kind of a familiar landscape to a lot of us, you know, like just this like plastic abundance of color and low prices and discounts. And I was having this thought last night. I was in the kitchen and we had a conversation with our community group on Thursday about how weird it was early in the pandemic when like certain things were like missing from the stores. And I don't like, this is sort of a real tangent, so I'm gonna keep going and kind of skip past that, but just the like, you know, like think about how it feels like what this level of abundance does to your understanding of who God is. And also what were the feelings when that level of abundance was not always present in the places where you usually are used to finding it. So all that to say, we learn what we do, and I very deliberately and manipulatively use that photo. So one of the things I'm interested, so this is, so I want to get into kind of like unpacking cultural liturgies that we probably mostly participated in. And I thought that education would be a pretty good example because it has, like, usually Jason and I were talking about this a little bit before, but like when you think of education, there's this immediate like content, and the content is kind of like primary. But there's also all of these habits and processes and spaces and things that you do as a part of being a part of a school that undergird all of the content and may actually form us more than some of the content does. So, this is like the most stereotypical, like nostalgic image of a schoolroom I could find. But it's also, like you've got the flag at the front of the room, everybody's in neat orderly rows, sitting at their desks. The teacher has an altar piece at the front of the room that they preside over. There's some like dignitary up, above the blackboard at the head of the room that everybody's supposed to venerate. Like they're just things that are happening because of the way the space is structured. So we've got like 10 minutes. So I might skip over some of these things just to get to kind of like, but sometimes like a good, as you're going through kind of habit audits, one of the things to sort of ask yourself is what is the telos of this habit and what is the liturgical part of it? Like, what does this thing love and what is its aim? And how is it forming me in that aim? So with schools, an example of a telos would be a civic attachment that would be liturgically enacted through the Pledge of Allegiance, through national holidays that are recognized, things like that. So I don't know if anybody wants to spit out a couple more examples, or if we should go to the next.
For education.
Yeah.
I've noticed that we love sort of discourse-based, logical, sequential ways of thinking.
Yes.
And that is formed, but I would say that all of my students and they're so inundated with expectations to write like 5-point argumentative essays. It's like every class ends with a test or with an essay where they like argue their point. It's interesting to me because it tells me that what we most want them to do is to just be able to like, I don't know, carry through an argument, which is I also value that. I don't hear me wrong,
Yeah.
but what I found is that when I assign them to like engage in writing a poem or something,
Yeah.
the amount of their soul I get out of them is exponentially greater.
Mm.
When I invite them to do things that are creative, that like sort of go along the grain of their own creative sensibilities, I feel like I'm watching a real person. And so I've been thinking a lot about how, I don't know how we got into this mode of doing school.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything wrong with tests. I assign tests. I think they're good. But it's weird that it's the default.
Yeah.
And it's like our highest value.
Is it easy or a struggle to get them to transition into that like creative?
It's such a struggle.
Yeah.
Because the test they know is easier.
Yep.
It's easier for them to just like do this thing that they know will get them the good grade.
Yep.
But whenever I assign, I always give them the option they can do a final project or they can do a test.
Yep.
95% of my students take the test.
Yep.
Because they know it's this like clinical thing they can just like do.
Yep.
And just memorize and be done with. The other students know that if they do the project, they have to work all semester long and they have to do like critical thinking and they have to be creative. And that's so much harder, but every single time my students that do the project come out having learned way more. Way more. But I don't know, it's just this interesting thing we find ourselves in education.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the control that the powers that we want to have over education. I want to know, I want to measure what people are learning, which I don't think a test really measures.
Yeah.
What they're learning, it just measures certain aspects of what happened.
Yeah.
But like in a Montessori classroom, you have it flips. So the kids, the teacher has on the podium, they're sitting among the children, and the children are operating they're doing their, whatever they chose, but it's orchestrated by the teacher.
Yep.
So what's in the room is specifically there for a reason, but a lot of it's about process and about, the product is not the thing.
Yep.
It's more about how did you do it? There's a way to do this, and did you know how? And if you didn't, how did you? I mean, it might have been creative, but you decided.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But when you were writing up there, I never equate logic and rote learning and logic. Logic is process oriented, not just learning answers.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've experienced a total degradation in our society valuing logic.
Yes.
Sure.
I think I'm extremely fearful and illogical over the years, more and more so.
Yeah,
What's the right word?
I used a couple of words about logic, but basically just process,
yeah,
right? Like,
Yeah, something
yeah,
about,
sequential thinking.
yeah,
something about just like, give me information.
Yeah.
But don't do anything deeper than just a regurgitation of information.
And yeah, and with tests and essays, a lot of like, it's, you know, depending on the teacher, some teachers really want and prioritize, like the other thing to caveat all of this is like, everyone has different educational experiences. And what's frightening to me, I had a very unconventional educational experience, probably like homeschooled, went to an alternative school, went to an art school for college. And what's interesting is how much of this is super familiar and still recognizable, even in my own very unconventional education. But yeah,
there's
good.
a reason for that.
Yeah.
Is because the education system in a developed country, or any country that's trying to develop, you know, missionaries go there and set up a school. What's their model? It's a Western model of structured education.
Yep.
The reason why I've always joked, I work in higher ed a lot, and I'm a master's student right now. And the thing that's frustrating to me is all the stuff that Jason just mentioned, but watching my own kids go through school. I like what she said a little bit ago, like that it's about control, and it's worse than that. It's actually, I have actually believed. I know Marcia said stop saying not to over spiritualize things, but spiritually speaking, structured education like that has an evil undercurrent that is so malicious. Just like most good evil plans, it's hard to see because it's couched with so much goodness. Sure, we bred a lot of NASA scientists in the 60s and today, and we developed like medical technology. Great. That's all the math and science, all that rote memorization where like ultimate truth exists in math, so to speak. Which is debatable, but that's one thing. The real purpose of Western education is enslavement. And just bear with me for a second because I believe that people need to be educated, but the columns, the rows, I always joke that because I worked at a Christian university and the homeschoolers that would come in, some of them were awkward, but most of them weren't. And they were the most free thinking and far more advanced. And in their personhood, like I would hire them as my student work in a heartbeat over, and it was like almost to the point of I had to check my own bias toward them in favor of them. Being sad, realizing that I'm not good at teaching my own kids education stuff. How to survive the streets of life, sure, but so like school here was originally set up as a way to create a product, us. We are profit centers for corporations, especially industry, the industrial age, who needed tamed population to show up to be learned from the the time you're 5, all the way through the time you're 18, to sit and do one thing for 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 hours a day. It wasn't, so like, if somebody shows promise beyond that, our education, if you look at it, splits people into 2 groups. And one group ends up being like the Jaces of the world, who go on to do more free thinking things, and like you're critically thinking about your own education process as an instructor. Thank God for people like you. But then everybody else automatically gets filtered. Like 90% of all students in Western countries get filtered into the second column, where it's just like passing through. Nobody really actually cares about learning. It's made so that all we are is we're batteries to plug in to an industrial complex to create more profit for those at the very, very top. And it's extremely nefarious. It's outright evil and dehumanizing.
And I think below that even is a deformed missiology, that rather than wanting to introduce Jesus to a diversity of cultural expressions, is trying to terraform basically different cultures to look like this sort of Constantinian Roman Empire Christianity. So it's a misapplication. I mean, that's one of the things that's interesting to me about the whole how are God and sort of the biblical authors contextualizing themselves to the cultures that they find themselves in, because that's a radically different approach to missiology than the sort of like colonial industrial, like we're going to build schools and turn people into like, similar workers.
You'll have no problem showing up on Ford's factory floor.
Yep.
To turn a screw 80 times a day for 10 hours for 52 cents an hour. And we'll call it good because it's going to be free. It happens in the East too. It's just more of a collectivist government.
Yep.
Thing. So society decides that it's good to educate our young people. But like the difference between homeschool or say Hebrew school or general school in general, even the most well-meaning Christian education, private education is to create people who can.
And actually, honestly, a lot of James K. Smith's thinking, where the sort of cultural liturgies and things comes from, is him being a professor in a Christian college context and saying, why do Christian colleges look so similar to a standard liberal arts private college? Why are they basically interchangeable? Like, why don't we care more about the liturgy of the school and really question what is this forming in the students?
And can I marry this to what he was saying about like he's lamenting the lack of logic in society? What I think he's actually saying is related to what I'm saying is that like there's a lack of free thinking, and if you want to be a free thinking on the quest for truth and be intellectually honest in your life, then logic has to follow, which means like you have to be really honest about yourself inside, which goes back to the beginning of like, well, my kids see me on my phone, so I try to be really intentional, and I'm hoping there's a reaction against it in the future. Well, logically, the only answer to something you can't control, culture, on an individual level, is your own actions. They're going to see you. Every time I attempted to pick up my phone in the car, my 13 and my 19-year-old for years, I've been like, oh, crap. So don't take to drive.
Yeah.
Guess what I do? Like probably at least 3 to a dozen times a day.
Yeah.
So that's,
like Marshall texted Jason and he read this Wendell-Berry poem to Lewis, and part of it is like the poem is how to be a poet, and it talks about finding a quiet place and sitting down and going, like get rid of any screens that obscure your actual involvement in reality. And so since he's read that to Lewis, every time Lewis catches him like looking at his phone, he's like, Dad, you're never gonna be that poet. Like, this is not gonna
so good though.
So I was like, preach, Lewis, preach. Yeah.
Because it greases the skids. Everything is about how to make everything easy.
Yep. It's an industrial mentality that's orienting us towards efficiency and
Because Jace, here's what's gonna
Yeah.
happen with the
Maximum,
phones.
yeah.
Right now, you're hoping that middle schoolers, that you're gonna raise middle schoolers who won't need phones as much. The problem is you're going to need them to need it. You're gonna do this thing where you're gonna have your phone because you're going to have an anxiety inside of you that you're gonna wanna get a hold of your child.
Mhm.
If they need you.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened. I did with my daughter, she's 13. And I almost got upset at her, like, it's like reminding a toddler, like, why haven't you tried your shoes yet? Or brushed your teeth? It was literally the same feeling inside of me. And I had to check that feeling. And it's because culture has made it so easy.
Mhm.
So easy. And I don't want to blame culture, but like my own laziness has made it not thinking, like, not exegeting, you know, these things, this
Yes.
stuff.
And and that's another, like, one of the reasons I'm interested in this is most of our cultural engagement now is predicated on obscuring itself and what it's doing to us.
Yes.
It's like the whole system doesn't want to be noticed. That's its job. Social media doesn't want you to notice that you're the product, that your attention is what they're selling and how they're making money. It wants you to think, this is a way that I interact with my friends and build community and really have deep relationships.
To that point, it makes me wonder if we're even going to recognize what the market piece is when it gets here. Now, that depends on what you think about, about, about when you're going to be taken up to heaven or not, you know, whether it's, you know,
Yeah.
when that's gonna happen, but
Yeah.
pre-trip, post-trip, but like, to your, what you were saying right there, like the COVID shots of the market, or like, you know, finding a way to implant something akin to our phone that we see in our optical nerves, like,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't know what that's going to be, right? I don't think it, whatever, but I don't know that we're going to know
I mean, I heard an
if
actually,
it's even a thing.
yeah,
right?
no, I heard a really fairly compelling biblical argument that it may just be like participation or like subjugating yourself to a currency economy. Like the way you use money being like, are you more invested in the money economy, or are you more invested in the kingdom of God? Like that may be like.
And so
Venmo is the mark of the beast.
What's that?
Venmo is the mark of the beast.
No, like cash, like the dollar, like
Yeah.
your
fiat money that doesn't exist
Yeah.
on anything, but still like that, you could say that about exchanging any good service for anything else. But like, at least with bartering, you have the one-to-one human element.
Yeah.
So you have to observe the dignity of the other humanity across the table.
Bartering. That'd be the worst.
It would be the worst, and I hate it whenever I travel and you have to barter, I just hate it. I'm like, no, I'm from a really rich
All I've got
country.
is a
Take my money.
sweater and I need a meal for my
It's
family.
so, it's like, it's a cultural thing. You step into it and it's
Yeah.
like, you go with humility and you like joke, and walk away and then like come back and then
Yeah.
they still get more money out of you than what.
So
And you just walk away with your meal. It's a trip. It's the best. Sorry.
Maybe they go home and they're like, I got that. You should see
And
this
you're like,
big
I
white
got
guy
this
I got today. I got all of his money.
And then you're just like, yeah, take my money, of course, like it's mine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But I wonder if we're slowly, like, to that point, like logically, that's the logic of free thinking doesn't create this chaotic, free-flowing, unlogic thing. It actually creates actual logic where you're reaching intellectual honesty. That's the only way to achieve logic if you're not talking about real math. And even then, you know, theoretical math gets weird. So like, are we taking on the mark of the beast slowly but surely every single day?
I mean, it's in some ways like, yeah, I think if you're not being, it's also interesting too, like right now we have this sort of like the prioritization of the like Western liberal individual autonomous person is really like everything is so catered to the granularity that's there that we have this weird, this is kind of an unformed thought, but there's this like unreality or like fantasy world that's being built to accommodate the like different people wanting to live and exist and inhabit their own radically and sometimes unreconcilable like personal narratives about the world and how it works and what's actually happening. And like that's a like that. So like like ideally, yes, like that logical, free thinking ability to sort of reason with each other and reason with the world would lead us to that. Like there's a level like like I think one of the things I think the Bible sort of upends all of those communitarian and hyper individualistic traditions, and it's like we need both of these things to be important at the same time. Jesus needs to be able to like give the woman at the well this like super personal word and like call her out of her specific lifestyle, and also like rely on the community bonds that she has with all of the people that she knows to go and tell them a story that's like, who is this person that I thought I knew like 10 minutes ago and now is totally different. And like we all are kind of living in this culture that's like ultimately bifurcated into the most specific individual fantasy realities.
It's easier to think in black and white.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And God asks us to live in tension.
Yep.
Between free will and grace.
almost always.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 9:40. I would love like sort of end of the road. I wanted to leave you with this sort of like Jace has been getting it like banging on the poetry drum this spring, and the idea that like the Psalms are really teaching us how to be honest with God. And so this Marshall McLuhan's super interesting. He's like not necessarily a believer, but very like astute cultural critic, and was writing sort of as TV was being introduced, and just seeing all of these downstream effects that we're now living with that have been exponentially exaggerated by the internet and all those things. But he says,
It also makes all freshman English majors in college insufferable to talk to.
yes, yes. But this is sort of the idea, like environments or cultures are not passive wrappings, but are rather active processes which are invisible. The ground rules, pervasive structures, and overall patterns of environments elude easy perception. Anti-environments or counter situations made by artists and prophets provide means of direct attention and enable us to see and understand more clearly. So in a world that is trying to obscure itself from us, our attention and what we pay attention to and how we pay attention is a really important discipline and practice. So I don't know if the sound will work, but this is a clip from a documentary about Wendell Berry. And this is like 4 minutes of him reading one of his poems. And this just feels like maybe the perfect example of reflective prophetic artwork that will like help us to sort of see. Let's see. This is the one you showed me a couple years ago. Yeah. Till tomorrow. I'm sorry.
But I'm gonna get it later.
Yeah. Let me see if I can turn. Oh, there you go. Here. Share. Is it sharing? I'm sorry. I meant to test this beforehand. It's not sharing. And what's the name of the network?
It's probably The guest one,
Vineyard
Vineyard
Office.
Office, maybe?
This is such a good clip too. If it works.
You can decide if it's homework.
Yeah. Yeah, if I can, I'll try to send Noel a link.
Don't even let me share it with you, I don't know why. Weird.
Okay, got it.
Sorry, Joel.
No, it's okay.
For sure, send the link to Noel. No.
Well. So maybe what we could do. Since there's 4 of us in the room, I could just play it for you on my iPad. Because it's really worth watching. Yeah, and recording. Peace.